This podcast is not a source of legal advice. No two legal cases are the same. Contact an attorney if you require legal assistance.
Welcome to the Mighty MERP podcast, where we explore the human side of high-performance professionals. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by David Bruno, a former prosecutor turned criminal defense attorney who brings powerful insights about the importance of mental health, avoiding burnout, and maintaining a balance in this demanding world of law that we're both in. David's legal journey spans both sides of the courtroom, and his story is enlightening as it is inspiring. Let's dive in. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Melissa. It's an absolute pleasure to be on your show.
I'm so excited for the conversation, and I watched your TED Talk this morning while I was on my Peloton working out. Definitely felt inspired by that. Tell me about your path into law, sort of your origin story, and how you decided that law school and becoming a lawyer was the right path for you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and it's such a great honor to be with you. I mean, look, I really never even thought about being a lawyer until I was in college. I mean, late college was when this opportunity really developed for me. I came from a family, my mom and dad, neither of them went to college. Blue collar growing up, they really provided for me and my sister and instilled in me really the hard work ethic that really has brought a lot of my success. Mm-hmm. And growing up in that household, learning from my dad, one of the phrases that I recall my dad always saying to me is early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. And it's really something that I'm reminded of regularly, because even to this day, one of the things that I write every single day in the journal is get up. You know, it's like my one thing. Gary Keller wrote a book called The One Thing. And that is sort of like boiling down like the tasks and activities that are the foundation for success. And if you could drill them all the way down to one, and that repetitive sort of thought process of hammering down that one thing is something to think about. It's journaling and up early for me. And that was really instilled in me by my parents very early on. And I went to, I was an athlete when I was growing up. I baseball, football, wrestling.
So I'm going to interrupt you. I'm so sorry, but you're a trial attorney, which we're going to talk about trial attorneys versus just general practitioners or other attorneys. But I think most trial attorneys, most litigators were athletes. And I don't actually have any statistics to back it up, but when you said I was an athlete, I think I'm a trial attorney. I was an athlete. I was a competitor. I played soccer. I played softball. So I find it interesting that it seems like such a common thread for trial attorneys to really not just be athletes, but connect it as such a part of their background and personality. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but go ahead. You were saying you were an athlete.
No, but I agree. I agree in the sense that, you know, when we're in athletics, we are in competition. I mean, there are generally two sides to every sport. You have an opponent, and your success is essentially the same as what we have in the courtroom. I believe success results from two important things, and that is experience and preparation. And when you are competing in athletics, I think it's the same sort of recipe for success. Is get the experience, do the hard things, and be prepared for that competition. And it's no different in the courtroom, right? So when I look back and I look to myself and I do a lot of reflection on where I am today and how I got the skills that I have, it was work ethic. And my mom, too, was always very organized. My mom was the one in our playroom that we had for me and my sister. I mean, there were filing cabinets with folders and manila folders. And I remember oftentimes walking into the rooms that my mom would be working in, and there would be piles of folders and documents, and everything would be color coded. And it's something that I also bring now to my trial preparation. I was just in Morris County on a FRO last week, and I have color-coded sort of outlines and cross-examination documents and all the things. But when I look back, right, it's that beginning, because I never even thought about being a lawyer back in those days.
Right.
I was going to Seton Hall. I went and I studied business. I was a finance major, and I graduated in 2003 from Seton Hall, and that was a very, very bad job market. That was some very difficult economic times for our society, and there weren't many jobs either. So when I wasn't getting the job that I wanted in the finance industry, I looked for alternatives. And that is when I ran into Ed Belinkus. And I don't know if you know Ed, but Ed was a former first assistant of Essex County, and he was also a former assistant United States attorney in the District of New Jersey. So he had that prosecutorial experience and was a criminal defense attorney. And he's from my town, and he was also into athletics in Randolph, much older than me, but really brought me under his wing to show me this awesome job that was out there. And I was like, wow, this is cool, because it really reminded me of the wrestling mat. It reminded me of the football games and the baseball games. And I started to take an interest in the law. And that's when I applied to all these law schools. And look, I wasn't the best athlete. I wasn't I wasn't the best student growing up either. And when I applied, I was getting rejections. I was rejected from Seton Hall. I was rejected from Rutgers. I was rejected from Pace and Brooklyn. And I was accepted to one small school down in Miami, Florida, St. Thomas Law School. And so I made the decision. I went down to Miami, and literally it was the best thing that happened to me. It was the thing I needed. I needed to change my environment because I was always in New Jersey. I still live in Morris County. That's where I grew up. But it took me out of my element. And it really forced me to focus on act for the first time in my life.
But I was going to ask though, like also being the rejected from, sorry for the interruption, but the being rejected from all the schools too, did that motivate you to know that if you were doing this, that you were going to be all in on the learn?
It did. When you get those letters and, you're faced with tough times economically, right? The job market and not many options. And then getting the letter after letter of rejection with one opportunity. And that was the change that I needed. An environment in the people around me, right? You could tell by the success of the people that you have around you as well. Influencers, the coaches, the people that you work with. And I was forced to go down there and really be surrounded by law school students. And we all had the same goals and we were immersed in the law. So I do well there. I come back home again on transfer, rejected everywhere except one school, New York Law School. And I went to New York Law School. I graduated law school. And again, no jobs except for Ed Belinkus, that man who took me under his wing, brought me under his office, and we started doing criminal defense work together. And it really was my first mentor. And I talk often about you never know who you're going to meet. You never know who's going to change your life. And that man changed the trajectory of my life, not only for the influence being a lawyer, but also the opportunity to get into the courtroom. And I started working alongside him. And I told this story yesterday. I'll tell it again. There was a doctor that hired our office. It was me and Ed. And that doctor also hired Bob Bianchi, who is my now law partner, and his father, Angelo Bianchi. So it was the four of us preparing for this case in federal district court. That was my first trial, actually, in front of Judge Chesler in the District of New Jersey on a very serious criminal case. And we would have these meetings and we would work. And I brought that work ethic and those organizational skills to that preparation. Right? I had my box and I had my folders and I had all the things. And I recall Bob sort of saying to Ed one day, man, I wish I had a Bruno. Like I made an impact. I definitely showed my value and those skills that I brought. And little did I know at the time that Bob was being vetted to be the Morris County prosecutor. He was a Governor Corzine appointee. Right. So I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know the impact impact that I was making on him at the time. And then he goes to be appointed as the head county prosecutor of the county that I grew up in and the county that I lived in. So he reached out and said, listen, there's an opportunity here if you want it. And certainly with the experience that Belinkus had, he was a prosecutor. I knew that I needed to get the experience to do what Ed was doing on the defense side. Right. And that's where I went to the Morris County Prosecutor's Office.
It's really amazing. It's such a great life lesson about those small connections. And just it sounds so trite or simple of just working hard and making the connections, and that people will see your value and your worth without necessarily doing anything other than being authentically you. So
sure,
it's amazing. And it sounds like you went to the prosecutor's office. You were still a pretty young attorney. And when people say to me that they want to be a trial attorney or they're interested in criminal law, my first advice to them is either go to a prosecutor's office or go to a public defender's office. And the reason why is you're going to get the most amount of trial experience. You are going to learn the most. I mean, I feel like I'm still learning every day in court and in cases, and the law sometimes changes, but those first 2 to 3 years at a prosecutor's office or a public defender's office, your knowledge, your experience, your ability, not just to prep a trial, but to interact with people, dealing with really challenging, emotional, life-affecting realities, and you're learning all of that. It really is being on the front lines. So that's amazing. I did not know that's how you met Bob either, which is a great story.
You know, Melissa, if I can, on this point, because I did talk about this in the TEDx talk itself, and that is oftentimes lawyers, they need to get the experience. Mm-hmm. And it's very difficult to get experience as a young lawyer. Right. Oftentimes, the more seasoned attorneys are the ones handling the cases in court. And there's so many consequences in the criminal justice system as well, to be just jumping in as an inexperienced attorney representing somebody that's charged with a crime with freedom and all the consequences at risk. So I think that you're right. That experience in the prosecutor's office is one that you're representing the state of New Jersey. And it's not as if, you know, you have somebody that's facing years in prison. It is the public service. It's impact service at its best.
It is.
So great experience. And I took that and I left with Bob. That's how we left. And we left in 2013 and we started the Bianchi Law Group where we are today. And that was the experience I really needed to do the work that I was doing and on the defense side.
Right. And you're probably a better defense attorney because you were at the prosecutor's office.
Yeah.
I agree with you. And I did hear you say that you wanted the trial experience. Yeah, no, you know, if you're not doing the public service, and I always say whether it's at the public defender's office or the prosecutors. I started in Philly at the public defender's office there. It was an intense training. They didn't even allow you to have a jury trial until you were there approximately 2 to 3 years. You had bench trials. You were in the juvenile unit, which also had bench trials. You handled misdemeanor trials, but not the major crimes until you had all that experience.
The other thing, too, I'll say about prosecutors' experience, right? Because, look, prosecutors have these squads as well. They have the major crimes unit. They have the sex crimes unit, the family, domestic violence. There are so many opportunities, too, to get into these squads. And that's important, too, because the squads have to go out on certain mandatory notifications. Mm-hmm. And I was very fortunate to get into the major crimes unit. Mm-hmm. We were investigating the most serious crimes. And I would go to the crime scenes with the detectives. And I would work on search warrant affidavits with detectives and go to judges' houses to get warrants. And in the autopsies, watching the medical examiners do autopsies and all those things. So it's not just like walking into court and like trying cases. It also brings this other experience on the investigative side and also administrative side. And there are so many things to learn at the prosecutor's office in addition to just walking into a courtroom.
So let me ask you a question as a former prosecutor, now defense attorney. I don't think for you it might have been as difficult because you started in defense, then you went to the prosecutors, then you went back into private defense. But it's a big shift from prosecuting people to defending them. And so I would say to you, did your views of justice or fairness change when you went from prosecuting to defense or vice versa? Because you sort of had a very interesting path where you handled defense beforehand, then you were prosecuting, and now you're back at defense. So do you think it's changed since you were on the side of the state for I would assume it was about 5 years?
So I don't think it's changed. Look, I think I took the optimal path, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And that was I was able to get some criminal defense experience first. Because on the defense side, and I know you could also add to this, when you're dealing with your clients, you get to know them at their best. Mm-hmm. In essence, you know, they're behaving like better than the allegation. Right? You get to know them in their elements. You get to know their family, their education, their employment, the consequences that flow from the criminal justice problems. And you really find and you get to know them better. And prosecutors, on the other hand, they're lacking that sort of understanding of who the clients are. They get to their office, and when you're a line trial lawyer, basically you walk into the office every single day and there's a new stack of files on your desk, right? They are coming in like the mail as prosecutors. And what they do is they open up the file, and oftentimes the criminal history is on the left. And then on the right, you'll find the police reports and the witness statements and the investigation. And it's like the bad guy, bad gal stuff, what we say.
Right. And the file is the state's best case also.
Yes.
So
they don't know who the defendant is. They don't know any of those things.
Right. And and everything in their file is the strongest part of their case.
Right.
And there's no credibility or nuance when they're looking at that file. So, yeah.
So what we prioritize on the defense side is mitigation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, on the defense side, and I think you're coming to the question, like, how do you do it, right? Like, you probably get the question all the time. How do you represent these people charged with crimes?
Yeah, well, I think that's the nicest way that you get it. I get the, you know, I do get the how do you do it, or how do you represent those
the way
people,
that you do it
or
is understanding that there's mitigation to be done. There's two ways and there's two tracks to handle criminal defense cases. Mm-hmm. There's holding the government to their burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt and assessing their evidence and whether or not there are legal issues to file motions and exploit and try to suppress and attack the credibility of witnesses. And all of that is one track. But there's a second track that is humanizing your client for the prosecutors, because there's that void of understanding who the clients are. Because when prosecutors do open up the file, like I said, they have those two sides. And what they have to do is evaluate the case and offer a plea offer, a disposition, because our criminal justice system only works when cases are resolving with pleas and negotiation, right? And oftentimes the young assistant prosecutor will have to go to a supervisor to get approval for that particular plea offer. And when they get to the approval, they are advancing the government's positions exclusively. Mm-hmm. So if us working on the defense side can humanize the clients, the defendants for the prosecutors, and maybe include just a little bit of that in that summary going to the supervisors for that plea approval.
Right.
I think it does change things in the eyes of the prosecutor, who need to evaluate the case and decide what's the best disposition for that particular case.
Right. I think we've talked previously, I think we both have the same philosophy, you know, of humanizing our clients, mitigating, you know. And I'm going to say I have some clients and I have cases where, you know, the mitigation is the goal because the facts aren't great facts, or there might not be a defense, but letting the state know. And mitigation is really advocating about your client as a whole human. You know, I say to my clients, what would be what would your biggest cheerleader say about you? I want to, and it's usually the mom, if your mom was here, tell me everything she would brag about you,
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes it's finding the fair and just results. I think people don't always realize that. Listen, there's cases where they're going to go to trial and they're going down that first path that you said, that it's going to be filing motions, that it's going to be fighting the case. And I'm going to say it, I have clients that are innocent. I believe in them, and we are going to fight, full force.
I'm with you.
But, the cases where they might not have strong defenses, it's really about humanizing and mitigating and finding the fair and just result for the state, but more importantly for my client, because people don't realize criminal convictions create a ripple effect, that it's not just a conviction. It can affect housing. It can affect employment. It can obviously affect their freedom. It has long-term not goals, but ramifications with any conviction. So when people ask you that question, how do you do what you do? I know what I say to people, which is, I like my clients. I might not always like what they do, but I get to know them, and I like the clients that for whatever reason I did not get along with or didn't like, it had nothing ever to do with what they were charged with or what brought them into my office. Nothing.
I agree. I love what I do, Melissa. Yeah. And we could fast forward a little bit too, because we have grown this law firm and we're servicing and helping more clients. And I wish that we could help everybody that calls this office.
Right.
Because financial resources is also a variable that unfortunately is important in our criminal justice system. Because sometimes, some of the more serious cases too require experts, require investigators, require effort and time that goes in. And that all does cost money to deliver too. So it's like impact and service at its best, which are values that I really are valuing in this season of my career, is the ability to help people, not only in this law practice, but also into the law life community that we're both in, and talking about mental health and attorney wellness.
Right.
Because that is certainly something I know we're going to talk about, because we both value that.
We are. I'm going to thank you for helping us shift the gear. But I was going to say, so you and Bob opened up your practice, your criminal defense firm, I'm going to say a medium-sized firm at least, right? And is it fair to say you're going full throttle on your career, right? Going 100 miles per hour. And then 2020 hit. COVID hit. And for you, who I'm going to describe you as like all in, probably what people imagine trial attorneys working 24/7, phone always in hand, nonstop, which is like the recipe for burnout. And all of a sudden, the courtrooms stopped, court stopped. Everything stopped in March of 2020. And when that happened, please share sort of, I'm going to say almost an awakening or a realization for you. And I'm going to say, I know you're still doing defense work, but it almost had you go down a different path or a different way of doing what we do.
Yeah. So Bob and I left the prosecutor's office in 2013. Bob is 18 years my senior. He was the county prosecutor. He had done the running around before. And when we opened up the doors, our roles were very clear. And I was going to be the one hustling, especially in the municipal courts and the county courts on the normal cases. And that brought me all across the state of New Jersey, early mornings, late nights. I was hustling, and certainly I was on a trajectory of overwhelm.
Right. And so if people don't know, when you're in municipal court handling traffic tickets, DUIs, and disorderly persons, and superior court, how many courtrooms could you hit in one day? Like, I don't know if people who don't do what we did understand the the amount of driving, the amount of courts, the amount of cases, I could imagine you being in 5 to 6 courtrooms a day with 10 to 15 clients, different clients that you're managing each day, right?
Yeah, there were a number of things pulling me away from my priorities. And that was municipal court, superior court, and I was trying a lot of cases too. I mean, I've built up a reputation to speak on domestic violence and restraining order work that I get from matrimonial attorneys throughout the state of New Jersey. And I was just in court last week on that. I mean, it's hurry up and go, voluminous scope of evidence that's relevant because of history. Right. And then on top of that, I started doing national TV work. Mm-hmm. And I started doing that shortly after leaving the prosecutor's office. So I was going into the city to do TV as well. Mm-hmm. Early mornings, late nights, in court. It was a trajectory of burnout. And when you said COVID stopped the courthouses, right? Not me, Melissa. I was on trial in Union County in front of Judge Candido Rodriguez on a serious sex assault case with a jury, and the judge grant order came down. Mm-hmm. And I ran to that order real quick, and I looked at it, and it said, courthouses were shut down except the ongoing jury trials. So I was on trial when the courthouses shut down, and I was still going into Union County Superior Court. I was the only case on. It was a ghost town. I mean, it was eerie, Melissa. When I was driving to Union County, there was no one on the roads. Right. And when I was entering the courthouse, there was a sheriff's officer with no one else. And the courthouse was empty. And even in front of the judge, I was filing for mistrial because the order was that you can't have more than 10 people in a room, while I had 14 people in the jury room. Right. So literally, when you say full stop, for me, it was like,
it was not a full stop. It was not a full stop. You were still in full mode. Yeah.
Yeah, but shortly after that case, I did come home, and we were quarantined in the house, and the courthouses were shut down, and there were no people calling our offices, and there was scarcity of the cases. Nobody was leaving their houses. No arrests were being made, and all of us criminal defense attorneys were looking at each other. Now what?
Yeah. So I'm going to just share a little bit difference. When it stopped, when the courts closed and we thought it was 2 weeks and then it was only going to be 4 weeks where you were in trial, I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to be able to catch up on my motions and briefs and filings for that month, which felt kind of almost like a breather, which is crazy to say. So I will also say
it didn't last for 1 month. This was an extended period of time.
Yes. Yeah. So tell me, after you finally finished your jury trial, it had to end, and you're back now quarantined in your home. What happened next? What was the you're talking about law firms concerned about clients, keeping overhead, still moving forward on the practice of law. How do you keep a business open if there's no court? So what did you do?
Right. Well, it's how you use your time. And I'm a big proponent of time management and eliminating distractions and focusing on what I call my rails. And my rails are faith, relationships, body, and business. Because there's so many ways to distract yourself, especially home. When we were home, right? It's Netflix and it's like all these things, and everyone's drinking and substance
I'll
abuse.
tell you, I went into my office every day because it was just me and a paralegal at the time, because my office was still pretty young, but I couldn't work at home. I had all those distractions, and I was fortunate. I don't know. I think you might have had really young kids when COVID hit, correct?
Yeah,
Where my kids were high school kids, And they were fortunate. I'm so lucky. You can hear my dogs barking, talking about being home. My kids were old enough and good enough students. So it happened my youngest freshman year and my twins were juniors. And then senior year into sophomore year that I could just wake them up and say, log on. And they logged on and they were fine because they didn't need the support or the help. And I was like, I'm going into the office. And because I couldn't work from home because of all the distractions that you're talking about, could not get anything done. Yeah. So
young kids at home during COVID, and so fortunate to marry the right person. And I have a support system at home, my wife, that I couldn't have done any of this without her. And her being available to do those things. And the big change, Melissa, was I'll never forget it. Bob Bianchi gives me a call and sends me a link to a webinar. And it was Arjon Robbins. It was Arjon Robbins, who is the owner of How to Manage a Small Law Office. It's one of these coaching and communities for attorneys. And it was like this free, webinar, 5 days in a row in 3 hours. And I'm like, what is this? It's like we never had. And there's there's all these masterminds and master classes and communities that we never took advantage of. And that was the first time. That was the first time being in a Zoom room and looking at all those boxes with a bunch of other terrified lawyers going through the same stresses and talking about business plans and key performance indicators and budgets and all these things that Bob and I never even knew. I mean, we ran our office. Basically, we paid the bills, and then whatever we had at the end, we cut it up. We didn't know how many leads we had. We didn't know conversion rates, and we never had forward-facing budgets for 18. None of that.
Right.
So we started to learn.
Because they don't teach us any of that in law school. I mean, not that when I went to law school, there wasn't the web anyway. I know I just dated myself. There wasn't, Westlaw was brand new. You had to a search cost X amount of dollars. But my point is that when we're in law school, we learn to maybe think like a lawyer. You don't really learn how to be a lawyer, and you certainly don't learn how to run a business. You don't learn how the leads, the marketing, none of that, So that's why there are lawyers that could be really good lawyers, but they're not successful law firms because they don't know how to run a business. So.
Absolutely. And I started learning things. And again, I didn't have that shift yet. I still was really focused on business and growing as a lawyer and learning the business and all those things. So I started to do those things. I went on the webinars and we learned things. And then we ended up in a group where we had Zooms with multiple lawyers, with a coach and all these things. And that's when I started to really listen to other coaches. And Ed Milet is a mentor of mine that changed my life. Okay. Because I was out in California after COVID learning about business with Billy Jean as marketing. He's one of those guys that talk about funnels and paid ads and all those things. And in Petco Park, San Diego. And it was a nighttime event. And Billy Jean talked and Dean Graciosi talked and ClickFunnels had a representative there. And then Ed Milet comes out. And this guy had a book that just came out called The Power of One More. And he's a motivational speaker. And it was shortly after the Uvalde elementary school shooting in Texas, where elementary school students were killed by a mass shooter. And he was donating the proceeds of his book to the families, right? And he talked about his father and he was raised in an abusive relationship. And he talked about family, and he talked about faith. And he talked about wellness and time management and gratitude and appreciation. And I'm sitting in this Petco Park in San Diego with 2 young children back home. And I'm thinking about what if they were my children? And, did I maximize the time that I had with them? And have I been using my time efficiently? And have I been focusing on the right things? And really, that was the change. It was thinking about my kids in that context. So on the way home from San Diego, I listened to his audiobook, Max Out. And I took notes, and I took all these notes. And then I got home and I started to listen to all of his podcast episodes. And I started to listen to Tony Robbins and Brendan Burchard, another mentor of mine, and John Gordon, author John Gordon of Energy Bus, another mentor. And I started connecting with these people and learning from these people about being more well-rounded on these other priorities, which I now call my rails. And that was the change I had to make. I had to eliminate the distractions, because when we're in these busy seasons of our careers, it may be a trial. It may be a volume of clients that we have to service. And that time that we have to put into that work is required. What's not required are the distractions that also take our time. So instead of the Netflix, instead of the fantasy football, instead of the alcohol, remove that stuff and focus on the work that has to be done. And then the other priorities instead of the distractions has been really the awareness that I needed, and the life change that came from COVID that I needed to change my trajectory, and also now be one of the most vocal alongside you on the social media platforms, on the stages and the CLEs, to bring awareness to this problem that attorneys have with attorney wellness.
Right. So when you say focus on your priorities, is it fair to say that you made a conscious decision to really explore what the priorities are? I think people very easily and superficially say, well, my family, my job, my this, without really, I'm going to say, prioritizing your priorities, which is knowing what they are and making sure that they really are first and foremost,
Yep.
So it's funny that you talk about listening to the podcast and reading these books. I feel like I went through the same thing as well, of trying to figure out how to be, in some ways, the best mom for my kids through their struggles with mental health, and being able to advocate for them and support them, as well as being aware of my mental health as well during that process, and still being a strong advocate for my clients. And it's figuring out the priorities. So while you were going through this process, did you talk about journaling? I know you journal all the time. Was that part of really narrowing in and zoning in on the priorities? And if someone said, what are your priorities? You're now able, I'm sure, to be specific,
rails,
concise,
my rails.
and those are your rails.
Yes.
That you always are able to return to.
Yes. Yeah. The concept of rails. Think about, a roller coaster or a train or whatever it is, and I could really get into like a meditation where I visually think about a train on its rails going through the mountain, and it's going to hit weather, and it may hit terrain and incline and decline. And the rail, if those rails are nice and oiled and they're slick and they're intact on the rails, it's going to allow that vessel to get through the tough times. And it's really the illustration that I repeatedly say in my mind and in my journaling, to stay on the rails. When I make decisions, I want to be on my rails. When I use my time, I want to be on the rails. So how do we actually bring awareness to this, right? Because this is important. It's easy to just say it, right? However, in addition to eliminating distractions, it's a worthy conversation about the habits that we have in our life. Because my habit of a morning is my rocket. It's my launch pad to the day. Okay. So I have instilled a habit in the morning and in the evening so that I could win my days. Win the morning, win the evening, win the days. Start stacking wins. So when I get up, I try to get up as early as possible, right? And when I do, I don't go to the phone I mean, how often do we roll out of bed, look at text messages, go to Instagram, in the emails, and just get completely distracted with fires, emergencies, and problems?
Mm-hmm.
So instead of that, I go to my Spotify and I have a playlist that I call God's Plan, which are curated songs that are positive. And I just throw on my headphones and I start listening to positive music. And then I get out my journal. It's the Brendan Burchard High Performance Planner that it starts off on the top with messages to self. And every single morning, I have to remind myself certain messages. And it starts off with avoid procrastination, triggers, patterns, and distractions.
Right. So and those are your personal, your every day, you're reminding yourself of your personal. And yeah, I always say to my kids, you know, sometimes we have to learn the same life lesson over and over again, and you'll see the pattern of the life lesson, and you see the pattern. And so you now every day are addressing it. I'm going to add one thing.
On the pattern, Melissa, let's talk about that for 1 second, right? Tony Robbins talks about patterns a lot in his work. And look, the early civilization had to realize the pattern of seasons first, right? The season of winter and spring and summer and fall, and how to cultivate food. It's no different in our lives. You know, especially parenting. I think for parenting, the words pattern and triggers are something that I need to bring awareness to, because my kids too are still young right now, right? Every night when it comes time for bedtime, they are hungry, right? It's like, instead of brushing and going to bed at a normal hour, it's, oh, we're hungry, or we're there, right? It's like the iPads and this and that. I could see now, if I bring awareness to these patterns, and also the triggers, I could see from afar now, bringing awareness to when the breakdown's coming, when the conflict's coming, right? And now, life's not perfect, trust me, and I still have problems parenting. But with that being said, the awareness of patterns and triggers is a good example in the parenting world, and also in our law practices and things like that. Distractions, going to procrastinate. These are just reoccurring themes that I see that I want to bring awareness to in my life. That's just one thing I write, Melissa.
Right. But I love that it's like the start of it is what I love about it, is that it's the start of it. I'm going to actually throw out a book recommendation, Atomic Habits by James Clear. I read that recently. I know it's been out for a while, but for people that are listening and they're like, I am not disciplined, I can't do that, or I am going to tell you that, read the book. It makes it so palatable about little changes. No one is going to wake up tomorrow who has never journaled, take out the journal. You're never going to wake up at 5 a.m. tomorrow if you sleep till 7:30 every day. You know, you don't have to make all these great changes all at once. It's really little changes, and it's such a great book of trying to really implement and explain it, you know, about how to create these positive habits that can be life-changing.
Look, you want to change your life? Change your habits. Simply put. You know, it's the best thing and biggest thing that you could do for change. And that is, and I feel that it's that morning, right? Because now I'm listening to the music, I'm starting to journal, I'm thinking about gratitude and appreciation. Who's the person I want to be today? What are the things I need to do, prioritize the things, right? And then after that, and I'm also hydrating with water throughout that process. Then you mentioned Peloton. There you go. You got the pink thing. We are so alike, honestly. So then after that, after the journal is Peloton. And that was a huge game changer for me when I got that bike. I have the bike in my house. I have the tread in the house. And then for anybody that doesn't have, I know you're on it too, but anyone that doesn't have Peloton or any like program like Peloton, there's other things too. Like there's a full body workout you could do. You could do a core workout. You could yoga, Pilates, meditation.
Do you know statistically 10 minutes of body movement actually has a dramatic effect on mental health? 10 minutes. Clearly, Dave and I are getting up and we're doing more than 10 minutes. I'm confident about that. But 10 minutes makes a difference of changing your mental health, making you feel more energized, making you motivated. There's like real scientific evidence that shows it helps with depression, which is, unfortunately a real issue, not just with lawyers, but with just many people today being diagnosed with severe depression, anxiety.
Without a doubt. Can I just speak on this? Because when I started that habit of fitness, exercise, I would write to myself. And again, you want to remind yourself of these things because we have an abundance of information coming from everywhere in our days.
Yeah.
Emergencies will come up and problems, especially as lawyers. I mean, all of our clients are experiencing problems, but I would write 20. So I want to do a minimum of 20 minutes on either the bike or the tread, and then a 5-minute core. Mm-hmm. So on my busiest of days, when I really don't have that much time, I'm just doing 20 and 5. That's it. That's it. And it's just it's the beginning of the day. And I was talking to somebody, one of the dads, my son's in baseball camp right now, and I got to bring him yesterday. And I was talking about this to one of the dads, and he's like, Dave, how do you find time to do that? And my response was, how do I not do it, honestly? Because the setting of the priorities for the day and really mapping out the day and getting into the right mindset while eliminating those distractions is critical to the day itself for me.
I agree. But I'm also going to tell you, when people say, how do you find the time? I think it goes back to the prioritizing as well. And I say this as a parent. Anyone who has kids knows that your kids are going to be brutally honest with you, whether you want to hear it or not. And when I don't exercise, just say I just stop for a few weeks for whatever reason. My kids, now my kids are older now, but when they were younger and we were all, they weren't in college, they weren't away, we were all living together, they were in school, I would snap. I would be less patient. And my kids would say, when was the last time you went for a run? They would know that was affecting my behavior, my mood, my mental health. And so I don't think you necessarily have to I do it in the morning for the reasons that you say. It sets off my day in a more positive way. It lets me focus about my priorities. It also helps my brain kind of organize the day in a non-stressful way, in a very relaxing way while I'm running or on the bike. But I do know some people do it at the end of the day. And I would say, and that's okay. It's about creating the routine and the habit of knowing that it's there. And I do agree with you about the 25 minutes. Sometimes I do put my timer on if I, for whatever reason, don't have the time that day. If I'm prepping for a trial, if I have, just say, a restraining order that I know has a lot of exhibits and I want to get into the office earlier than usual to make sure everything's organized, then I do it for 10 minutes as well. So when people say, how do you do it? I always say, we all prioritize what's important to us.
A couple things on this point. First of all, that's the morning. And look, that morning is a rock star morning. I mean, shower up, get the suit on, and then either go to court or go about your day with that start. Really has a positive trajectory. But at night is equally important to wind down, okay? Mm-hmm. And I go back to the journal at night. And this journal now it's not being used as it was designed at all. Mm-hmm. I am using it completely differently right now. In the calendar section, I am just writing everything I remember from the day. Melissa. Up at 6:00, God's plan, workout, went to Morris County Court. I saw Melissa. I saw Greg. I saw all of the things that I could remember from the day. I'm just writing down. I'm writing down the whole day, right? And also there's prompts about gratitude and appreciation and what I learned from the day and things like that. But that brain dump, what I have found is very valuable to shut off my mind at night. Is like, instead of staring up at the ceiling and thinking of the conversation I had with Melissa, it's kind of moving past that.
Right.
And then also kind of using that to plan the next day if there's something that needs to be done, a follow-up or something like that. Because sleep is just as equally as important as launching. And it's getting to a nice mindset. And then after I do my journal, I put on my headset, again, in the Peloton app. I go to the meditation, Aditi Shaw, and she knows this too because I always tag her, and it's funny because like the person that puts me to bed is Aditi Shaw.
Right? That's funny.
Meditation. And I never finish the meditation. I always wake up, my headphones are like somewhere in the bed or on the floor or something like that, but I'm able to shut down.
Right.
And that is so important too, because I know when we have problems in our lives, and everybody does, lawyers are servicing other people's problems, and they also have their own problem.
Right.
A part of my attorney wellness talk that I frequently give to attorneys. But the problems need to go on the pad and not in the mind when we're trying to sleep, because it's easy to start thinking about and ruminating about and worrying, and the anxiety comes, and it's inevitable that you're staring up at the ceiling, or the phone comes out and you're scrolling, or the Netflix is on, because that's the time to shut down the mind.
Right. Right. And again, sleep is, that I also talk about wellness, and I always talk about very simple things to do to change or to help with fight against depression, anxiety, and just general well-being. And sleep is also one of those main, you cannot, I would say burnout for so many lawyers actually is triggered by the lack of sleep,
Yeah, feeling. And that's one of the reasons I think that that morning routine is so important, is because the attitudes and efforts that we have oftentimes rely on the way that we're feeling, either mentally or physically. Now, look, I want to get to the physical conversation again, because I actually had a back surgery in my life. So in 2011, I had a spinal fusion, L5-S1, that debilitated me. I was literally on a bed, struggling to get out of bed, and had to really learn how to walk again. Okay? And so I've come from a place of zero fitness. And I understand that everybody is not physically able to do everything that we're talking about right now. And in fact, just a couple weeks ago, all right, we talked about my son in baseball. We were in the batting cages not too long ago, okay? And I get in, I put the helmet on, I got the bat, right? And I swing, I'm like, ugh.
Yeah.
Next day, I wake up with pain in my sciatic. And then the next day it got worse. And I'll tell you, Melissa, I thought I may have screwed up my fusion. And for anybody that doesn't know what a fusion is, there's a plate in my back between two vertebrae with 4 screws fusing that disc and area together. And oftentimes when people have fusions, the problem that they have is that the fusion breaks down or the screws come. I thought I had that problem. So obviously I wasn't doing my 25 every morning, right? I wasn't on
You
the
were
bike.
probably not moving very well at all.
But what I was doing at that time was stretching. I knew that I had to do something I was not going to just let it get worse, right? So stretching, I went to the doctor, which is another thing about bringing awareness as opposed to avoidance to get the professional analysis and examination. And it wasn't my fusion. My fusion was tight, and it wasn't that. It was the secondary muscles. But I learned something again in the fitness conversation. And that is, you need to do what you can do, right? You're not going to be at the same level as Melissa and I at all times. In fact, I wasn't. Then I got to walking. So now stretching, and I'm walking, and I'm building back up to where I'm at now, where I'm back to my 25 and doing my push-ups and stuff. So I think it's a worthy conversation for our listeners to understand. It's the same thing in relationships, right? The relationships may not be where you want to be at all times. And these rails may not be all firing on all cylinders on each level of the rail. But that's why the awareness needs to be brought to the forefront to say, hey, I may need to work on relationships now. I may need to work on my relationship with my spouse or my kids or my siblings or my parents. But it's awareness. That's the critical part of the conversation. Because once the distractions start flying and the emails and the text messages start coming and all the other things in life start happening, it's easy to get derailed.
I agree. So let me ask you, what's your personal definition of a successful day? Now, I know we talked about the mornings, the evenings. I love the reflection. I try to write I write positive things of the day, because sometimes I get home and I just feel exhausted.
I know.
And so I like to write the positives. But what do you consider a successful day when you feel like you've won the day?
Sure. A couple things. Brandon Burchard, again, I'll go to him. He wrote the book High Performance Habits, which is another habits book in addition to Atomic Habits, The Planner. And he also has a community called Growth Day. And I am a member of Growth Day. And Brandon Burchard is an example to follow. He puts out original content every single morning. So it's one of the things that I try to listen to daily. But every single time at the end, he says, today is a great day to grow. Now, a successful day, in my opinion, would be improvement, growth, incrementally, as small as it may be. All right. It's one of the things I write on the paper is I want to squeeze every part, every juice out of the day that I can. All right. So the other thing too is in that morning process, I'm actually writing down my problems. All right. Because look, bringing awareness to the problems is important. And a day of problems is successful if you bring awareness to the problems, right? I have a resilience framework that I say, number one, awareness over avoidance. Then it is what are the actions that need to be taking place on the things that you can control? Right? So oftentimes we're thinking about the things that we can't control.
Right.
And I believe that the stress and the anxiety often comes from the uncertainty of the things that we can't control.
Right.
So I want to be aware of the things that need to happen, the problems that I have in my life. I want to take action on the things that are bothering me. And I want to focus on the things that I can control versus the things I can't. And for the things that I can't, that's where that first rail comes in for me. And that is faith. All right. And I mentioned God's plan for me. That is something where I define faith. But if it's not religion for you, I would say optimism. And that is being optimistic that today or tomorrow is going to be a better day, that good things are going to happen, and with the faith for the things that you can't control and the action for the things that you can control. I am trying to improve and grow through the days. And with that mindset, oftentimes you'll start knocking down the things and the problems that you're worried about with action. Right? So
And
that's kind of
optimism
how I'm
is,
thinking about days.
yeah, optimism is something that you can learn and you can change your mindset on, because there are people that are just not naturally positive or optimistic about whatever it is that is stressing them out. And you can change your mindset about it, even if it's writing it down or saying it. I have
If you
said to
struggle with
people,
this,
I say
if
to
anybody
people,
struggles with this, I have another book recommendation. Sorry to cut you off.
No, it's
But
okay.
John Gordon, The Energy Bus. All right. This is a book that John Gordon wrote. He's an author and he has many books. Right? He's the coach for the coaches. All right. Dabo Sweeney in Clemson. And he goes to all the professional football teams. He's the guy that's coaching the coaches, right? And he's got this book called The Energy Bus. And if you listen to John Gordon too, he talks about his negativity and the house that he was raised in. He was raised by a New York City detective. And he tells the stories about the detective, his dad saying, good day. He's like, what's so good about it? And John grew up in that environment as well. And he writes about it and talks about it. And he's one of the best sellers. And The Energy Bus is a book. I actually listened to that on audiobook with my kids. Right. And they talk about the Energy Bus now. And there's the Energy Bus for kids. But on optimism and mindset and attitude, books like The Energy Bus are certainly skills that could be learned.
They are skills. And I'm just going to say that I always say it as find the silver lining. So when somebody says something to me that's like, it was a terrible day or whatever the negative of the statement is. And, I have 4 kids. So a lot of times it's to them of like, what's the silver lining? And unfortunately or fortunately, they do roll their eyes at me. But in the end, when we discuss it, there is always a silver lining. And it might not be apparent. It might not be what you wanted, but it might be something that you can take away in a positive, because there is always a silver lining. So positivity is a skill, and it can be learned and it can be practiced like everything else we're talking about today. So
caught not taught. I mean, for kids, another very, very simple but effective phrase. And that is, look, they're watching. Yeah. It was my birthday recently and my daughter brought home this thing. It was Father's Day too, around that time. But she brought this thing and it was like a fill in the blank, like Mad Lib sort of thing. And what came through on those answers was like, what I appreciate about my dad, his positivity, like it was like the principles and the way that I'm trying to hold myself as a leader and role model for both my kids and the legal community is really pouring out, not only in some of the feedback I'm getting from my kids, but I was down at the State Bar Association recently, and I see lawyers frequently. They're always commenting on the Law Life articles that I write and the TEDx talk that I gave and the frequent CLE. It's like when you get the positive feedback from these communities as well, it really gives you positive reinforcement that what you're doing is making impact. And that's really another way that I define my successes is impact, service, and community. I want to be pushing those 3 principles constantly.
That's great. So I'm going to thank you so much for your time. You've given we have been talking for a long time, and I think we could continue talking, which is crazy.
I could go all day.
But let me just ask, do you have anything lined up next professionally or personally that you want to share or that you're excited about?
So many things. Like, first and foremost, the New Jersey State Bar Association is the largest community of lawyers in the state of New Jersey. And I was recently appointed by the incoming president, Christine Amalfi, to be the chair of the membership committee. And that is an awesome responsibility that I'm looking forward to, because I have a year to work alongside the president and the administrators of the Bar Association. And my initiatives are to bring awareness to community, because I believe it's one of the answers to attorney wellness. And that is to be active in the community, to get alongside like-minded individuals. And I believe that the New Jersey State Bar Association is the group and community that could bring that opportunity to people. There are so many benefits and opportunities in the Bar Association, especially. Not to mention the services that they provide for attorney wellness and mental health. They have a hotline that any lawyer can call that is experiencing problems 24/7. And there's even free counseling that they match you up with just by being a member of the association. That's a benefit. But also the opportunities for professional growth and personal growth, to raise your hand, to be a member of a committee or a member of a new section, or to give, right? There are opportunities. And so as the chair of the membership committee of the State Bar Association, my initiative is to bring awareness to these opportunities for professional and personal growth. So I am gathering like-minded members, and we have already discussed this, and Melissa's going to be a member of the committee. And we have our first in-person meeting at the Law Center on July 10th. And this is going to be a year of bringing awareness. And also, the LinkedIn platform, which both you and I are on, is an excellent opportunity to advance community and link up and connect and nurture and support people by way of comments and join the conversations. So I am going to make it a point to teach our community, our members, the people in the association, how not only we can support the Bar Association to propel the benefits and the opportunities through the algorithms of our social platforms, but also to use the platforms as a way of connection, nurturing, and supporting each other in all of our initiatives. So I have a lot of things coming up, but at the top of the list is going to be that opportunity for impact and service and community that has been given to me by President Christine Amalfi to be the chair of the membership committee.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation onto the committee as well. I look forward to working with you. And thank you for joining Mighty MERP podcast. It's been great.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. And I look forward to continuing the conversation and working alongside you and collaborating on this very important topic of attorney wellness.
Thank you.
So Candy Valentino is an author. She is in the financial industry. And she appeared on Ed Milet's podcast. And I listened to her on Ed's podcast. And I connected with her and I reached out to her and she asked me to come on her show. So it was a lot like the podcast we just did, where for the first time I was talking about overwhelm and burnout and the changes I made to my life. And then all of a sudden, people were text messaging me and thanking me for talking about that. And I was like, holy shit, I might be onto something here. You know, and then the TED Talk opportunity came, and that is when it just blew up. Because so obviously after that, it led to more opportunities and then more positive feedback. And it was the positive feedback loop that really continued that initiative.
Which is so funny, or so sort of crazy, that you were having the burnout conversation pretty much at the same time that the Geraldine Lawrence moving up to her presidency was doing the Putting Lawyers First task force, that it all came at the same time of culminating about lawyer wellness and well-being. I'm not sure if you know this. We had an attorney at the same time who committed suicide in our community. And it's, you know, we are in a very small community where I work. And so it was very shocking and very just like putting it also wellness at the forefront, because it was an individual that was loved, respected. Everyone would say how kind and positive he was, that it just all seemed to culminate at the same time of like really having those conversations.
Yeah, here's the crazy part about that. And Geraldine and I are very close. I mean, I'm her go-to when she needs help on the DVs, and I don't know how, but I missed that whole initiative. Like, I wasn't a part of that, you know? It was like, I did nothing on it. And meanwhile, I'm doing my own stuff with talking about the topic. And it was Geraldine that brought me on the wellness committee to speak and do a keynote.
Right.
And at that time, I didn't even know about committees. I mean, this is kind of why my initiative is bringing awareness to all these opportunities. Because, I was in the criminal practice. I was a trustee, but I was just dabbling, in essence.
Right. Well, people say, what is the state bar going to do? I mean, that's like people's thought is, what is the State Bar Association going to do for me? Why should I pay this money? And I think where you are, I think people can see the value. Where I am, it feels removed from the State Bar, because there's South Jersey and then there's South Jersey, and we are really far south. And it is hard for us to be involved in the State Bar. We feel, I'm going to say generally, there's a feeling of disconnection to what is occurring there. And I say this as a North Jersey born and raised person. I am from Passaic County. I grew up in North Jersey, but I've lived my adult life as an attorney in Atlantic County. And when I'm asked to join committees, which I do, and I'm happy to volunteer, I do have to say, do you know it takes me 2 hours to get to a meeting, which is impossible to do midweek.
Yeah.
You know?
And I talked to Angela about this, and my first meeting will be in person.
Right.
Everything else will be hybrid. Everything else will have a remote option for it. You know, because I do think that there's a place for in-person for those that can, for networking as well. But to be able to accommodate the, people raising families or the conflicts and things like that, there will always be an alternative hybrid remote option for me as I continue on this conversation.
Right. I would say in-person is always better, because you're having those personal conversations over coffee or a snack before and after the meeting. But there is the benefit of having more diverse in area and backgrounds by being able to do it virtually as well.
Yeah, but it's good that you bring that up, because I'm looking to improve, and I'm definitely looking to get new members. Not only just raise awareness for the existing members, but there is value here. There's no doubt about it.
Right.
Mighty MERP is available on iTunes, Spotify, and all your favorite apps and players. But the best way to experience the show is to visit mightymerp.com, where you can subscribe, rate, or submit a voice message to the show. That's mightymerp.com.